Hey everyone, I haven't done this in a while. I'm going to make videos on the class material. They'll be like one of the lectures I would do if we were in a classroom, and I'll try to make them shorter. But hopefully, this will help you get the finer points necessary for the assignments. So if you're watching this, this should be beneficial, or I wouldn't do it. So let's start with height. I'm going to talk about the height video that's part of your reflection assignment because it's a really useful set of concepts moving through the course. It's an attempt to find a middle ground between the philosophies of the right and the philosophies of the left. And his point largely is that you can't have a society just operating on left philosophies, and you can't have a society just operating on right philosophies. Here's basically why. If you're only operating on the preferences of the philosophical right, order, structure, tradition, hierarchy, those are all necessary things for society. You can't have one without those things. But with only those things, the society becomes ossified, rigid, oppressive, almost necessarily. And so that's not a society that anyone wants to live in for any length of time. It's stable, but stability is not the only thing we should be concerned about, which is why we need the left. Now, if we only operate by the left, it's just constant change. Everything's ambiguous. It's postmodern, right? It's chaos. And there's nothing anchoring us. There's nothing mooring us morally, socially, metaphysically. There's nothing there to grasp onto. We're just these random things floating around. Change is ever present. There's nothing that grounds us. You can't even have a society at all with that. So you bring them together. And that's where his moral foundations sort of perspective comes in, where he says you've got fairness and reciprocity. Harm, care, which is we don't like to see humans suffer. Fairness, reciprocity, which is we like things to be fair. That requires more nuance. And in later versions of his moral foundations theory, he broke fairness, reciprocity apart into separate pieces. We won't do that right now. But what do you mean by fair, right, is an important question. Either way, both the left and the right think harm, care, and fairness, reciprocity are important. The distinction comes in with loyalty, authority, and purity, chastity, not always about sex or promiscuity, but other concepts of purity, right? These three things are very important to the right, but not the left. And so in the reflection assignment, we ask you to think about the values that you come up with in your value card sort and do the same type of analysis, give the same consideration that height does in this example. The right thinks that authority is incredibly important, and it is because it creates relationships. And a sense of authority is really important in a society because it's like we can't all be in charge. That just technically doesn't work. So we have to have someone that we defer to that's in charge. Well, how do we know when that person is good at the job, or when it's the hierarchy of competence? Well, it's when they reach a point of power because they've shown that it's suitable for them to have that power, and their ability to manage and delegate is like good. So that's a good hierarchy of competence, but there could be hierarchies of incompetence or corrupt hierarchies where you have corrupt, incompetent, bully, tyrannical people reach a point of power. The difference is this hierarchy of competence is stable and good, and we should want those, versus a hierarchy of corruption or corrupt hierarchy, which are bad and unstable and will collapse necessarily. Leave it there. So authority, and then loyalty, in-group concerns, right? The concept of us versus them. This is baked into humans. You will not get rid of it. We are a tribal species, really, from our earliest stages, proto-human, earliest stages tribalism. There are certain religions that are specifically like tribalism is the whole thing, which I don't think is actually very good, but beside the point. Loyalty is really important for societal structures to function, right? How can you even imagine a world where I consider every human life of equal value in relationship to my wife and children? Not going to happen. And very few other humans would think that way. maybe a couple, and it's not like they're deranged or wrong. They are just using a different moral calculus. The vast majority of humans, right, do have what I would call concentric rings of association, something Oldenquist mentions briefly in the following articles. So you have your authority, you have your loyalty, right? And this is important for group formation, for society formation, and ultimately for nation states to function. And then you have purity and chastity, which is less important than I think the previous four. And that's concepts of good moral behavior that manifests in various ways. He gives some examples. The point is, the political left doesn't really like these other three. They think they're the sources of oppression and tyranny and whatever. And they're not entirely wrong, which is what your reflection assignment asks you to do. You think your values are good because they're your values, and they would be good because you wouldn't have bad values, right? Well, for any of you, and a lot of people do, say, well, I'm loyal. Loyalty is an important value to me. Okay, well, by saying that loyalty is an important value to you, what you've just said is, I prefer some people over others. That can go in negative directions. Here's a quick example. Let's say my brother is a violent junkie. I know that his regular behavior and actions could not only lead to him harming himself, but certainly to harming others. And let's say that I have factual knowledge of him actively breaking the law in a violent way. Do I have an obligation to call the police and tell them, my brother just did some crazy stuff and I need to turn him in? If you're extremely loyal to your family, you would have a substantial conflict there. And it's easy to understand how people would have that conflict. But do you owe a greater debt to the society at large or to your sibling? This is a conundrum for some people. Some people might say, obviously I side with my brother regardless. And some people would say, obviously my brother is a threat to society. Of course I have to turn him in. But therein lies the distinction, the difference. And so Haidt is showing us this range of values. The ones preferred by the left, the ones preferred by the right are actually all of them. And the ones that the right and the left disagree upon over here are evidence that not all values are automatically good, or that some of our values can have flip sides or negative mirror reflections, I suppose, which is what you're asked to consider in your reflection assignment. Haidt is telling us that you need the right and the left to have a functional society. If you're just operating by the right, it's ossified, it's rigid, and it's tyrannical. If it's left, it's just pure chaos, and nothing ever forms or gets put together, or you can't generate anything. Putting them together, you can move forward, managing change over time as necessary, while still keeping the structure of a society right together, for the safety and stability, right, of people, which I think is easily expressed in Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan. Probably we'll talk more about that, I think, in the future. There you go. That's Haidt. Now, very quickly, let's jump into let's go with Putnam. Bob Putnam, famous sociologist, notable for writing this article, or that this is a subset, a snippet, whatever. It's a small piece of his larger work. Jeez, my words fail me. It's called Bowling Alone. And in this, he talks about the decline of social capital in society, and that's bad. What is social capital? This is an important question you'll need to answer. Social scientists in several fields have recently suggested a common framework for understanding these phenomena, a framework that rests on the concept of social capital. By analogy with notions of physical capital and human capital, tools and training that enhance individual productivity, social capital refers to features of social organization such as networks, norms, and social trust that facilitate coordination and cooperation for mutual benefit. You now know what social capital is. For a variety of reasons, life is easier in a community blessed with a substantial stock of social capital. In the first place, networks of civic engagement foster sturdy norms of generalized reciprocity and encourage the emergence of social trust. This all can be considered a coherent moral order, which is not identical from culture to culture. Social capital is good. A lack of social capital is bad. Social capital creates opportunities. It leads to the fair and equal treatment of members of that society. It decreases rates of corruption and rent seeking, as he calls it. It lowers crime rates and aberrant behavior. This happens in a high social capital, high trust society. When trust goes down, social capital goes down, and things go bad. There's a lot of implications for this in the modern world, to be sure. Sadly, one of the things that his research shows, not something he was happy to discover, highly homogenous societies have an easier time developing social capital and trust. More diverse societies are lower trust and have a harder time generating social capital. This is our reality, and there is no going back, so there's no claims made that we should. The point of his article is social capital is going down. He gives us some changing social values, changing gender roles, changing economic realities, a host of things, technology, that have led to this decrease in social capital, which is not preferable. And so we, in our world, in the US, with our diverse society, and then as it sits socially, culturally, and technologically, we need to find new ways to develop social capital because the old ways seem unavailable to us. The family is certainly a point of interest for him and Sawhill in later articles, I think week 8 or so. And this is his concern. Social capital good, and there's a model. Civic engagement, civic participation leads to an increase in trust. When we interact and have shared experiences, real first-person interactions, not digital crap, real first-person interactions, shared experiences develops trust. Even trust across diverse groups, because you find that what stereotypes you may operate by could indeed be false or misguided, who knows what. And so the idea, this is his theory, through this engagement, you have positive firsthand experience. It is possible you don't have positive firsthand experience. His assumption is, on average, you will. And that positive firsthand experience with people that are different from you can then be extrapolated out to other members of that group, and you form a new set of conceptions about people that you didn't previously understand. It's his pitch, more or less. Through engagement, you increase trust, and through trust, you develop social capital. And social capital is a thing that we can literally spend to solve collective action problems in society. It gets us all on the same page. Generating social capital additionally creates a coherent moral order. They kind of happen simultaneously, I would suggest. There you go. I think that's kind of the important stuff for the assignment. Moving on. It's probably one of my favorite articles in the class, contentious though it may be. This guy named Andrew Oldenquist wrote this article in 1980. Putnam's was written back in 96, a little more recent, still old. Andrew Oldenquist is highly critical of the American education system and the American culture in general when it comes to how we teach kids to be members of our society. He critiques American culture for being, I don't want to say too soft, because that's not quite right and it's not accurate enough. He talks about other societies around the world, even societies that we were potentially in conflict with, the USSR, communist China, although after 1972, we were actually on pretty good terms with communist China. Different societies around the world that can have very different frameworks for how the world ought to work and how nations ought to work and how societies ought to be run. Even those places that have strong differences with us were still able to do a good job of instilling citizenship in their kids. And we have gotten to a place, and I think it's maybe more true now than when he wrote this, we have this sort of all you need is love, very hands-off, very lackadaisical approach to child rearing, one of his concerns is a misapprehension of human nature. This particular topic of human nature will come up again in later weeks, certainly in the Declaration, and more so in, I think, week 7 or so with the Bistrito article and the Federalist Papers. I digress. We have misapprehended human nature, and so we have run afoul of good citizenship education. At the outset, I'll just address what you see on the front of the article here. Citizenship education should foster group loyalty and white middle class values, especially in black and poor white neighborhoods. Is it racist? No, I don't think it is. And I say that because of the context that he provides for that statement later in his article. What he's saying with the scare quotes around what he says, white middle class values. This concept that he's addressing at the outset, or that they show you, is tied to his discussion of moral education, which is point number 2. There are good and bad values in the world, and there are a whole bunch of other ones that maybe don't have a particular moral valence. You can prefer one value or another value. Maybe it doesn't matter too much, but some values maybe do carry moral valence, and certainly in terms of what it means for a society. For example, we cannot have a society at all unless the vast majority of citizens are honest, obey the law, pay their way, shun violence aimed at personal gain, and treat other citizens fairly, and in general, care about their neighborhood, cities, nations. Okay, so these are pro-social values, and the opposite of those values would, I think we would all agree, be bad. Is hard work or laziness better? Is honesty or dishonesty better? These shouldn't be complicated, right? The answer should be obvious to us. And so his point is, since it should be obvious that there are good and bad values, we should teach all the children in our society the good values, the pro-social values. They don't belong to a particular group. The white middle class doesn't own those values. They didn't make those values up. The fact that they practice those values is good for them. And for any members of our society that don't practice or adhere to or celebrate those values, they ought to. And then we would all be better off. They would certainly be better off. Those children would be better off. That's his pitch. So it's not really a part of the assignment, but it's certainly a fun discussion point. What you're going to do in the assignment is you're going to address his first 3 points of citizenship education. You're gonna state them and briefly explain them, and you're going to show how they connect to Putnam's model of social capital, and connect they do. So here's the first one: membership in a moral community. Citizenship implies a sense of belonging to a moral community. A moral community is a group of citizens who share a conception of the common good together with the social, economic, and political institutions which structure the community. The common good is the flourishing of one's society. It reinforces one's disposition to treat people equally within the moral community because it is a good that is held in common with the fellow citizen. This is the coherent moral order. Membership in a community, a moral community, is the coherent moral order. Haidt talks about this in his previous one a little bit. He talks about it much more in his article in week 9 about globalization and nationalism, and in slightly different terms. Odenquist is talking about it here, and Putnam references the same concepts. Coherent moral order will not be identical for every society around the world. Not identical, but they won't be all that different, because there are simply pro-social and antisocial behaviors. And so you can't really have a society based on antisocial behaviors. Quick thought experiment. What if, right, about to blow your mind here, what if instead of honesty and, hard work and not murdering people, what if a society or like a reality existed where the opposite was true? What if stealing was good and murdering was good and laziness was good? Well, obviously, that can't exist. Right? You can't build a society. You can't have any, you can't generate anything with those values. So they can't exist. So to the extent that any moral community exists anywhere in the world, some of those things have to be a part of the equation. Now, technically, you can have a moral community that doesn't accomplish a whole lot. Maybe it sustains the existence of its members. They don't accomplish a whole lot, but they survive. Whatever. His point here is that a membership in a moral community is the coherent moral order. And why does this matter? Because humans they crave coherent moral orders. In fact, we'll talk about in week 9, when the moral order is threatened, some people freak out and they don't like it and they react in ways that almost none of us prefer. We'll get there eventually. Membership in a moral community. Boom. Moral education. We already kind of touched on this one just previously. When they are children, citizens of any non-suicidal society are taught basic principles of non-selfish social morality. Without such training, mutual cooperation and trust is impossible, basically what I just said. This, together with shared concern for the good of one society, is what he means by A civilized society is a moral community. And we just talked about some of those pro-social values. There you are. Now, number 3. And this is multifaceted. This one's got more moving parts to it. Citizenship skills. Effective citizens of a democratic society must be taught appropriate skills, some cognitive, some partly affective. If the people ultimately determine the direction society takes, as ours does, then they must learn their history and the nature and operation of their institutions. They need to learn to reason in ways that are logical, informed, but also empathetic. And as school children, they should perform public service tasks that acquaint them with old people, poor people, municipal problems. Different people in your society might have different experiences or circumstances, and it is important that we all understand each other's realities to some extent, but because we are tied together. What does King say? We are woven together in a fabric of mutual. Okay, I'm going to get it wrong. You'll see next week when we talk about King. We all are tied together. Our fates are tied together, especially if you're in one political cultural entity like a nation state. The world's ugly. History is ugly. People do bad things. We have to acknowledge the bad things that we've done. Don't ignore the good things that you've done, and reason in ways that are not just cold and calculating, but that acknowledge the harm, care, and the fairness, reciprocity, a concern for human well-being and human suffering. And then finally, this one goes back to the almost ancient Greeks. The ancient Greeks thought that the purpose, the telos of a city-state, a nation-state, city-state, was to create virtue, to make virtuous citizens. Now, we in the modern era do not think it is the government's place to instill values. Now, of course, the left and the right both would like to use the levers of government power to do that, but we largely reject that premise. It is not the government's job to tell us what is moral and immoral. Maybe we'll talk about that later. Students, kids, need to engage in service activities. These habits of cooperative behavior that simultaneously serve the public good and create a sense that one is part of a community. So in this, they're referencing back to this ancient Greek notion of practicing virtue. You become virtuous by doing virtuous things, going and engaging and helping, right? Different groups in your society, whether it be ethnic-based or age-based. Lots of old people, right? Boomers are aging out. And there's a whole lot of people that would benefit from young people. This is also critical, and this is central actually to your CEP project. By going and engaging with different groups in society, and particularly with different age groups, we have a huge gap in values between the older age cohorts in society and the younger ones. There is not much understanding between them. And I think it behooves us all to make steps to try to close that gap by at least developing understanding. You may not agree with them, but it's really, really beneficial to understand where someone's coming from, because then at least you can connect the dots to go, I understand why you think what you think. I don't agree with it. I know how you got there, and it's not crazy. But my values lead me in a different direction. If I had your values, I understand how you get to where you're at. Sometimes that's the best we can do. Membership in a moral community, moral education, citizenship skills, and now through that rather long video, my apologies, you have all that you need to do the assignment. And if you figure out that watching these videos is beneficial, then maybe you'll keep watching them. Later.